we're going to have her talk with us a bit about ICE and about the what's going on at the Northwest Detention Center.
Yeah,
please go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. We have the new Trump administration that has gone full throttle into this authoritarian regime that has turned the country inside out, upside down, and tearing communities apart. And ICE has been given immense funding. They're now becoming a type of domestic military to terrorize Americans and immigrant communities. And when you think about like imperialism, we often say whatever happens abroad eventually comes home to roost. So the tactics they use in other places are going to be used against us, and that's what we're witnessing. And we've seen horrifying videos of people being pulled, educators who are working in daycares being pulled out of work in front of children, toddlers, and being dragged out. And it's violent. It's not it's traumatic for these children, but it's also traumatic for the person experiencing this and the community witnessing it. Recently, I saw a video of militarized agents intentionally on purpose hitting someone's car, like slamming into them, hopping out of their black tinted car, maybe it was a silver tinted car, with their semi-automatic weapons, their military equipments and weapons, and pointing it out at American bystanders, pointing at the victim of a car. Like, it was not even like a car crash of like being deliberately hit. And this young woman is going to work, and they pull her out of the vehicle and drag her out, and aiming their guns at her, and begin to in front of everybody. And this was recent. It happened a couple of days ago in Chicago. We're seeing the deployment of a National Guard being used to terrorize American cities. This is what we wake up to every day. How does this show up at home in Washington? One concern is, the threat of sending National Guard and militarized agents to Portland. Will that come to Seattle next? Will that come? I mean, it has kind of arrived in Spokane, for instance. And so we're seeing this expanded funding for ICE, expanded arming of ICE with military-grade equipment and guns and so forth. And with the Northwest Tacoma Detention Center, there's 1,800 people, maybe more now, who are disappeared into the system in that detention facility. And it's parents, it's educators, and it's community members. Often, whether they're documented or undocumented, it doesn't matter. So you'll have people who are residents, who are here with legal status, who are there, people who are undocumented but maybe have relatives or a significant community tie to Washington State and to the city, and in the sense of their families here. They build community here, and we're watching them not get adequate food, not get medical treatment, not get their medication. We're seeing former military veterans being disappeared into the system. Recently, Veterans for Peace came out with a statement about this. I think it was like a press conference today or yesterday, and they're having a town hall today over in Tacoma about this. And so the most pivotal case that everyone is discussing in Washington State, and I'm a friend of this family, which is the Chaudhry family, in the case of Mohammed Zahid Chaudhry. His wife, as many of us know, Melissa Chaudhry ran for congressional seat District 9 against Adam Smith on the mostly an agenda, that is very popular in the sense of like, our money should not go to arming more criminals, and we should spend that in our communities. And so that was basically her run. But even, mild criticism or even, direct, acknowledgement and criticism of the genocide in Gaza right now, that made the family a political target, and which they have said explicitly. And you have Zahid, who was on August 21st, 2025, he was pretty much kidnapped by ICE agents at his interview, his citizenship interview. So he's a longtime resident, lived in America for over 20 years, has American children, married to an American citizen, was a resident. And so he went into the Tukwila immigration office in good faith for a naturalization citizenship interview. He did everything right, followed everything by the book. And at the end of the interview, there were ICE agents there, took him into a tinted car, didn't tell his family, and just kidnapped him, basically. Sent him to this detention center. And he was in solitary confinement for several days, and deprived of his medication for weeks, deprived of any kind of quality sleep for someone who has a lot of health issues, forced to, live in a condition where there's no adequate meals. All the meals are just, it's kind of like gruel. Like, if you can imagine what gruel looks like this, unedible, just disgusting food that nobody can eat. None of his dietary requirements are met. No one else's. Recently, there was a lockdown in the facility where over 100 people were just taken out of the system, taken out of the space, and they were just being deported. They were being either transferred or deported as this lockdown is happening. And none of the family members knew where they were going, if they were being transferred somewhere else, and they could be transferred to Florida, to Alcatraz, detention center. They could be sent to El Salvador. They would not know, and there's nothing they could do about it. And there's been a couple of wins in the courts, in the sense that recently a judge said that a bond must be given to those detained, that it was their right to receive bond, and it was a violation of the Constitution, and to get due process. And ICE is basically just ignoring it. Once that was issued, they actually did the lockdown and then deported 100 people. Like, that was like their response to giving bond. It was like, nope, we're just gonna transfer people and deport them. And so we're seeing an administration that flagrantly ignores the rule of law, that flagrantly violates the Constitution, and that's where we're living under today. There right now, from Florida, as a specific case, there's over 2,000 people who've disappeared. They don't know where they are. Nobody can find them. Nobody knows where they went. And this has been like a historical issue of this since the beginning and inception of ICE, and as a militarized agency for enforcement in the United States, and its expansion from the creation under Bush's administration to the expansion under Obama, and what we're seeing today with with Trump, but also Biden as well did it. It's just further and further expansion of of the power and funding of this agency. How this impacts our communities here. A lot of immigrant communities are scared. They're scared to go out, scared to go to work, scared to be in communities, scared to even like politically speak out and object, because you can be targeted even if you're a resident, have your papers, for your political speech. So to even criticize the Trump administration is now like a crime for a lot of immigrants, and it could be used against them. And so their social media posts, for example, is the Trump administration said a couple months ago that social media posts will be used to determine like the moral character of a lot of immigrants and vulnerable communities that can be easily targeted. And that's, you know, a flagrant violation of the Constitution, as we all know. And yeah, that's pretty much the update that I have of everything that's going on with the situation with the detention center and the growing funding, arming, and expansion of this militarized enforcer agency.
Great. Thank you so much, Halima. And I'd like to just, highlight for us all that something Halima said about ICE. Like, this agency, this secret police force that is kidnapping people off the streets, making them disappear. This secret police has been expanded and funded every administration, regardless of what team they play for. Every Democratic and Republican Congress has voted to give these people more money, more equipment, more authority. These people, there are no laws to hold these people accountable as there are regular police forces. And this is the police state that the establishment has created for us. Regardless of which team they claim to represent, what they really represent is the protection of capital and the enforcement of the police state. And it highlights for me why this system is unredeemable. That this is what we, as Greens and as people who refuse to play this game, why we must fight against this. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. All of us are going to be at risk, and we have to be willing to accept that risk. If you don't accept the risk and accept the danger and accept that we have things to lose and are willing to lose those to fight for what's right, then we are complicit. We are suddenly going to wash our hands of it because we are not in danger yet. But when rights are taken from one group, they can be taken from every group. And what is happening to our neighbors now will happen to us in the future if we do not stand up and fight back.
Can I just add one thing? I would say a recent case in Chicago was the raiding of an apartment building. Everyone in the apartment building was removed from their home, zip-tied. Children, adults, everyone, whether you were an American, documented or undocumented. Everyone was brutalized. It was in the middle of the night. And yeah, we are all in the same boat. The police state will come after all of us.
It absolutely will. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your words and for the update on Zahid Chaudhry and his family. I see that Dr. Ware has joined us a little bit ago. I would love to introduce him. We have running for governor of California. Most of you know Jason Call, who ran for Congress up here in Washington 02 before, and Jason is Dr. Ware's campaign manager, as he was Dr. Stein's campaign manager. And I hear Butch speaking. He crosses my TikTok feed a fair bit. I see him on talk shows. I find him an enormously inspirational speaker, and he doesn't pull any punches. And so I'd love to hear from Butch, and I don't want to limit what he talks about, but I'd love to hear personally, why you have chosen to run as a Green Party candidate, why you are willing to wade in to politics at this moment, and how you would advise we stand up and meet this moment of growing violent fascism in our country before it's too late. So please, Dr. Ware.
Okay, how's my sound? Am I coming through okay?
Got you great, right, sir.
Outstanding. So it's an honor to be invited to speak in this gathering. Really humbled at the invitation, and I'll jump right in with the invitation because my hope is to use this conversation as an opportunity for us to think collectively and strategically about how to emerge as what this country and this world needs in this moment, which is a genuine opposition party towards fascism, which is not currently existing in a position of power that is sufficient to beat back what is the resurgence of American white supremacy and capitalism and imperialism in its terminal phase. So that's going to be the overall thrust of my comments, but I'll start where you asked me to begin. And I apologize if you guys are getting the sounds of church bells in the background. I don't know if you can hear that, but I'm in my office at UCSB, and for some reason they chose 2:30 in the afternoon to do a bell tower conference without a concert, without letting any of us know. So I hope it's not too distracting for you all. I'm trying to survive it. Just let me know if the sound is an issue. So the first why, those of you who perhaps only got to know me after Dr. Jill Stein invited me to run as her vice presidential candidate may not know how I got pulled into electoral politics. So I'll just tell the short version of that story because it opens on to why I'm running for governor in the state of California, and what I will humbly submit to you Greens should be considering as our course of action in this current moment. So the first thing to say is that I interviewed Dr. Jill Stein for my Instagram Live, for my social media platform in early August of 2024, and 24 hours later, I got a call from the campaign asking me to jump on a Zoom. I got into a Zoom room like this one with about a dozen people in it, and I was asked if I would consider running for vice president. 24 hours after meeting Dr. Jill Stein virtually, I was asked if I would consider running for the second highest office in the land. And that required that I make a stark and sober assessment of what I think the role of electoral politics is in liberation work. See, I've been doing liberation work throughout my entire life as an activist, as an organizer, and as an educator. But I never necessarily considered that an electoral intervention was the most crucial piece of liberation work until I was called to reflect on what I could do potentially running as a Green vice presidential candidate. And that sent me back to the man that's always over my shoulder, not just in my office, but in my heart and in my consciousness. You guys should recognize El-Haj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X. And for those of you that know my story, you'll know that I converted to Islam, my personal faith tradition, at age 15 after reading Malcolm's autobiography. I read that book cover to cover in one night, and I wanted what Malcolm had at the end of that book. Malcolm had a liberation from his inner demons and also his external oppressors. And it wasn't just my initiation into what became my faith tradition, but it was also my initiation into the Black liberation tradition, to the Black radical tradition. So when I'm reflecting on how we move in this moment to respond to the resurgence of fascism and imperialism, I'm mostly reflecting on how we can take the lessons from the Black liberation tradition and apply them in our current moment in order to make effective change. So that's most of where I'm going to be speaking from, and I'm going to try to keep this to 25, 30 minutes so that I can call in questions and conversations so that this can become a collective reflection, and hopefully like a collective call to action. So the first piece from Malcolm that I had to engage with when I was considering what is the potential role of electoral politics in our moment was to go back to a 1964 speech that Malcolm gave called the Ballad of the Bullet. And the Ballad of the Bullet is how I want to frame the first part of my conversation here tonight. Do you guys know this speech? I'm sorry, I'm a professor and I'm in my office, so I'm going to do the classroom thing. Like, hit the raise hand button if you know this speech, right? Or hit a like button. Okay, perfect. So I don't have to explain the whole context. But 1964, Malcolm delivers this speech at least two separate occasions. There are different surviving extant versions of it. And the basic argument is an ultimatum to white supremacist, imperialist America that liberation is coming. And it is going to be taken through one of two routes. It will either be taken through the ballot, through a peaceful transfer, or it will be taken by the bullet. It was an ultimatum to a society that is drenched in and steeped in oppression. That you can do this the easy way or you can do this the hard way. And that was the way that I understood the Ballad of the Bullet until Dr. Jill asked me to consider running for office. And then I actually went back and I listened to every single syllable in both of those speeches. And I came across something that Malcolm was saying that I had missed, despite the fact that I've been living with Malcolm over my shoulder for 35 plus years. And that is, Malcolm said this. He said in 64, he said, we're going to knock on every door in Harlem. And we are going to register every black face behind every black door, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but independent. Malcolm was already seeing and saying that the duopoly is not the answer. The duopoly has no future for the liberation of black people or any oppressed people, which is not news. Malcolm had framed the struggle between liberals and conservatives as a political game of football in which the black man is moved around a field but never actually served. Malcolm had spoken about the white liberal as the most dangerous thing in the Western Hemisphere in 1964, when white conservatives were hanging black people from trees, when white conservatives were turning dogs and fire hoses on black protesters, when white conservatives were putting bullets in the brains of white voting rights activists and burying them in shallow graves next to Mississippi roads. Malcolm concluded that the white liberal was the most dangerous thing in the Western Hemisphere. He never had any illusions about genuine separation between the two capitalist parties that collectively exploit the people. And just to take one quick parenthesis inside of this, it was Julius Nyerere, the great African socialist, the first president of Tanzania, who said, of course the United States is a single party state, but with classic American extravagance, they have two of them. Right? Of course it's a single party state. Of course it's a single capitalist entity, but it would never be enough for greedy fat Americans just to have one facet of a single party state. They have to have two. So now back to 64 and knocking on every door and the Ballad of the Bullet. Malcolm then went on to continue. He said, and whoever we find behind those doors who does not have the responsibility to register themselves, then we are going to have strong words for them, or we may just run them out of town on a rail, is what Malcolm said. And when I heard those words, I said, wait a minute, Malcolm is conceiving of participating in electoral political process as a mandatory action in this moment, that it is not something that is optional in a revolutionary framework. It is something that's required. It is a matter of moral responsibility. The ballot or the bullet is not just a threat to white America. The ballot or the bullet is an ultimatum to oppressed communities to utilize every tool at our disposition in order to liberate ourselves, including electoral political means. So with that, then my lifelong concern of mutual aid and direct action and political education and activism and community organizing, I understood that I was being called into an electoral political fight. And that's what I want us to be thinking about strategically in this moment, is how to successfully execute this electoral political fight so that we can actually emerge as what the Green Party has always been destined to be, which is the true voice of opposition to environmental destruction, to social injustice and oppression, to capitalist exploitation, to endless warmongering and imperialism. This is the mandate to which we must rise in this moment. Back to Malcolm. Malcolm said in a different speech, we are not outnumbered, we are out-organized. And that's the first thing that I want to say to this particular gathering, is that we as Greens have sat too long in this position of plucky third place go-getters who are interested in, changing the Overton window, shaping discourse. We have accepted not a spoiler role, certainly not, but we've accepted a position of being on the outside looking in. And that for me is predicated on absorbing frankly, some misconceptions about where our potential political power lies. I actually do not see us in the long term as a third party, because I don't think that we're outnumbered. I think that we're just out-organized. And I think that we're badly out-organized in some critical ways, especially when it comes to electoral politics. But Malcolm continued, and he said, on this point, never let your enemy tell you how many of you there are. Never let the man that you are against form your opinions for you. And the reason why I'm citing that in this moment is that I want us to disabuse ourselves of the idea that we are running as plucky outsiders, and just start to think of ourselves as a group that is going to rise to this moment and to become what the world and what this country needs in this time, which is a genuine anti-capitalist party that is capable of delivering actual electoral results and victories and taking power through the ballot, with the hopes that this party, whose aspirations are always nonviolent and whose values are always nonviolent, will give this dying empire the off-ramp that it so desperately needs, because Malcolm was not wrong when he said it's going to be the ballot or the bullet. It absolutely is. And you can see that as the billionaires and now trillionaires start to collect more and more wealth and leave people more and more dispossessed, as American empire becomes more and more ruthless in its extractions. This dying empire is going to go down one of two ways. It is either going to be ushered into an era of sanity, and in which the republic is saved as the empire collapses, or both will collapse. And it is our role to give people an alternative at the ballot box, because as Malcolm and so many others, as Mark pointed out on the way in, these two parties are both capitalist parties. They're both imperialist parties. They are not going to provide us with any solutions in this moment. So then what do we do? In order to take the lead in this moment, I'm going to humbly propose my own view and my campaign's view of the intervention that I think that we can collectively make. And that's going to require me describing the intervention that I'm seeking to make in the state of California, and the role that I see it playing in our overall movement as Greens towards liberation. And that begins with some reflections from another Black liberation figure, the great Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture. Stokely Carmichael was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, It should be noted that both Malcolm and following Malcolm's lead, Stokely Carmichael took strongly anti-Zionist positions as early as 1963, 1964, 1965. They understood the interconnection between oppression here inside the United States and imperialist oppression abroad, and that caused them to stand for Palestinian liberation the same way that this party has stood for Palestinian liberation and reparations in the same moment and in the same breath. So Kwame Ture, for me, he was somebody that reflected deeply on Malcolm's insights about how to effectively organize politically, and he crystallized some of those teachings. So the first one, and really this is the one that I'm going to focus the rest of my comments around for the next 10 to 12 minutes and then open things up to questions, is that Kwame Ture said revolutionaries don't just mobilize around issues, revolutionaries organize against systems. I'm going to just repeat that. Revolutionaries don't just mobilize around issues, revolutionaries organize against systems. So when I was called into taking on an electoral mandate, I had to start to reflect on how we could use a revolutionary political party as a tool to move people from mobilization around issues, environmental sanity, police brutality, Palestinian liberation, ICE abolition. I'm going to name a few more over the next few minutes about how we could move a lot of the energy that right now is rooted in mobilization around specific issues into actual organization against the systems that are productive of each of those issues. Let me explain what I mean by that. After I started to wake up politically at age 15, one of the first things that I did was march against police brutality in my own community. I was living on the south side of Minneapolis at that time, and there was a kid in our neighborhood that got shot and killed in his own backyard playing with a water gun. Okay. And in 1988, when we went out and marched, it was a few dozen of us, and almost everybody in that audience, everybody in that crowd, everybody in that public was Black. In 2020, the George Floyd uprisings brought into being the largest mass mobilizations ever against police brutality against Black people, correct? Had you guys ever seen so many people mobilized around this core issue? I never, as a 15-year-old kid, imagined that I would see white folks outnumbering Black folks 5-1 at an anti-police brutality protest. Never imagined that I would see Latino Americans outnumbering Black folks 3-1. And that's if I'm including Afro-Latinos in both categories. It was beautiful and it was heartening and it was empowering. And we saw our people and we mobilized on what had previously been an impossible scale, but it was mobilization around the issue rather than organization against the system that was producing the police violence. So despite the fact that the mobilization was of massive scale and was indeed worldwide, we saw mass mobilizations in Paris and in Palestine and across the globe. But despite the fact that these mobilizations were exponentially larger than anything that we had previously experienced, they were not effective organization against the system. What's the difference? Kwame Ture said mobilization is temporary and ephemeral. Organization is permanent and durable. It is repeatable. It is not an episodic stance for justice. It is an institutional and structural one. He said it's easy to get the unconscious, as he calls them. The word is a little harsh, but the unconscious, as he calls them, to mobilize against an injustice because people have an innate sense of justice. But it is difficult to get them to take routine patterned action in order to resist. It's difficult to channel them from mobilization, which is episodic, into organization, which is durable. Are you starting to understand what the potential role of an actual revolutionary political party might be in this moment? So what happens when the mobilization does not become organization? Then Team Blue, which has to cosplay as an opposition party because its electoral base is, largely people of color, takes power, and police kill more people in every year since the greatest mass mobilizations against police brutality. It would appear to be a paradoxical result unless and until you understand the distinction between mobilization and organization. We are now sitting at a point where police have killed more people in every year since George Floyd was choked out over 8 minutes and 46 excruciating seconds than in any year previous to that. It's disgusting. 1 in 3 stranger homicides in the United States of America is when a police officer kills a civilian. And we now see cop cities that were, built in Democrat-controlled cities, Democrat-controlled states, the escalation of massive repressive police forces on a bipartisan basis. Let's go to 2023. In October of 2023, a lot of people who were not taught by Black revolutionaries to understand Zionism as an ethnic variant of white supremacy, as a regional variant of white supremacy, were just waking up to what Zionism really is in October 2023. They're waking up to the reality that the same settler colonialism which genocided Native American and indigenous populations in the Western Hemisphere, this is exactly the way that it looked, because this is exactly what it is. Settler colonialism doesn't change tactics, it just changes venues. It always slaughters women and children. It always proceeds in ruthless ways to demonize and dehumanize anyone who would resist. So a bunch of people, for the first time, mobilized on a mass basis for not just ceasefire, but for Palestinian liberation, for the end of apartheid. And we have seen in these past 2 years, the greatest mass mobilizations for Palestinian liberation that have ever taken place in human history. Palestinians outnumbered sometimes 100 to 1 in these mass mobilizations. And for those of us that knew what Zionism was as early as the 1980s, and when we were protesting against various particular incidents of Zionist violence or Israeli expansion, the only people in those crowds back then would be Palestinian Americans, a few Muslim Americans, some Black revolutionaries, and a handful of hardcore communists. And that was the group. These were small gatherings and, small protests. Now we have mass mobilization. But 2 years of mass mobilization has not been able to procure the result. It has not actually ended the ongoing genocide. Even the so-called ceasefire has not ended the ongoing genocide that takes place in Gaza. And those of us that study and write about the history of imperialism understand why. We know that ceasefires are often used as strategic tools in ongoing projects of settler colonialism. They're used for public relations purposes. They're used to reload and rearm. They're used to delegitimize resistance. They serve all kinds of purposes, but it is not at all unusual for ceasefires to be declared as part of an overall strategy of settler colonial expansion. So we've seen mass mobilization, bigger crowds than any of us ever imagined we would see for Palestinian liberation, but once again, not organization against the system which is producing the outcome, just mobilization around the specific issue. More from the Black liberation tradition on how to understand and to present something that Greens are uniquely positioned to speak with authority on. and that is the imperial boomerang. This idea, first put forward by the great Caribbean intellectual M.A. Césaire, then made popular by his close friend and intellectual interlocutor, Frantz Fanon, the idea that whatever the empire does to its colonized subjects abroad will eventually boomerang back on the metropolitan population and become the very instruments of exploitation and oppression that are used to keep the imperial core oppressed.